What's good? It's Wood. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. Canelo Alvarez. People want to know who he's going to fight next. It's always one of those questions. You know that he's targeting two different fight dates, in early May and then in September. But after unifying all four belts at 168 super middleweight, everybody's speculating, is he going to fight Makabu up at cruiserweight? Is he going to take on one of the 175 light heavyweight champions, Artur Beterbiev, Dimitri Bivol, Joe Smith Jr.? Is he going to fight Triple G a third time? And if he does, is it going to be at 168 or 160? Is he going to fight the only other major threat, or at least widely recognized threat, at 168 in David Benavidez? Many people want him to fight him. Is he going to fight Jamal Charlo? Well, Eddie Reynoso just, said that he views Jamal Charlo as arguably the most attractive fight right now. Now, he also said that they do have their sights on a third fight with Triple G, Gennady Golovkin, who is supposed to, at some point, it was canceled or postponed, due to the pandemic and travel restrictions, but Triple G was supposed to fight Ryota Murata, which was supposed to be a unification belt for two of the four belts, because after Canelo left middleweight pretty much for good, Ryota Murata, the lesser title holder, was then elevated to the actual super title holder of the WBA. Triple G holds the IBF belt, and then Demetrius Andrade's the WBO, or now former WBO belt, if he does indeed get stripped as he goes up to 168. And then Jamal Charlo is the WBC champ, actually longtime WBC champ now. He's defended that thing 5 times successfully. But Eddie Reynoso said that Jamal Charlo, he's had a couple pay-per-views. He's a widely recognized name. People are into his fights. He's an exciting fighter, basically saying that they are being weight conscious. So to me, that potentially eliminates Canelo going to cruiserweight right now to fight Makabu, who just edged a victory that I thought Mkunu probably should have won, but this is the second time they fought. Makabu was just given the close decision win over Mkunu. So Makabu is still the WBC cruiserweight champion, but because Reynoso is indicating that they are going to be careful with weight, I don't think Canelo is going to fight cruiserweight right now. I don't think he's going to fight light heavyweight against Beterbiev, Bivol, or Joe Smith Jr. just yet. Now, he has fought once at light heavyweight. He went up there to fight Sergey Kovalev right before the COVID pandemic. This was his last fight with Golden Boy. We're talking November 2019, and he did knock Kovalev out after pretty even rounds for like the first 6 to 8 rounds. It was very competitive. Ends up knocking Kovalev out. But, because it's one of those like Roy Jones scenarios where he went up to fight John Ruiz, and then when he returned to light heavyweight, yes, he did beat Antonio Tarver the first time. Some people forget that. They think that Tarver just knocked him out, and that was the second time they fought. That's why Tarver in the beginning of the fight said, "I got a question," when the ref said, "Do you have any final questions before we start this?" "I have a question, ref. You got any excuses today, Roy?" And that was kind of an iconic moment. But yeah, that was the rematch between Tarver and Roy Jones Jr. But people think and believe that Roy Jones never really looked the same or performed the same once he went from, light heavyweight. He was 168 before that, 160 before that. So this was like his 4th or 5th division, goes up and wins a share of the heavyweight title against John Ruiz, and then came back down to light heavyweight. And that's when he started running into trouble. In that first fight with Tarver, Jones won the decision, but he was fading. He looked more fatigued and was starting to get hit more than anybody was used to seeing Roy Jones get hit. He was invincible, it seemed, for several years. So I think that they're taking these things into consideration, where if Canelo does go up and actually starts to put on light heavyweight weight, which he didn't the first time against Kovalev, he basically came in as a 168-ish pound fighter fighting a bigger guy. Well, if Canelo was to fight either Beterbiev, Bivol, or Joe Smith Jr., I'm imagining he's going to bulk up just a little bit so he could absorb their power, so he could hang with them for several rounds and not be too outsized, even though they are naturally just bigger guys than Canelo. Canelo's about 5'8", 5'9". These guys are around 6 feet and aren't, skinny dudes. So if Canelo is careful and basically saying, okay, I want to handle all of the 168 business I need to handle before committing to light heavyweight and then making that my new 168, basically, where you want to say, I came, I saw, I conquered, which is what he did at 168. I know a lot of people are like, well, he didn't fight Benavidez, but again, it was not Canelo's fault that Benavidez wasn't holding the WBC belt anymore when Canelo went to 168. If he was, I have no reason to believe that Canelo would not have fought David Benavidez. He was targeting all the champions. He's like, Callum Smith, you got a belt, the WBA, took that. And the WBC was up for grabs in that fight as well because David Benavidez had just missed weight against Romer Angulo, so he was stripped of the WBC belt for the second time. David Benavidez is a two-time WBC champ at 168, but he was stripped, so 2 of the 4 belts were up for grabs when Canelo fought Callum Smith. So he won 2 in one fight. Then he fought Avni Yildirim, non-title fight, just a mandatory, beat him pretty badly. Then he fights Billy Joe Saunders for the WBO belt. Then he finished that whole round of championship belt collecting against Caleb Plant, taking the IBF belt. Well, before Canelo sets his sight at 175, the next division up, I think he's going to want to handle all his business at 168, and that basically, if you still have this Golovkin trilogy fight, which you know is a mega money fight, why do you want to leave that on the table and just let that kind of die on the vine? I mean, the people, casual fans, know more about Triple G than they do about David Benavidez, Artur Beterbiev, Bivol, any of these other guys that we're talking about. So why leave such a big payday on the table? So the other guy that people want you to fight in or around those weight classes is Jamal Charlo. And, I've been wanting to see him fight Jamal Charlo since they were at 154 for a long time. Both Jamal and Jermell Charlo were fighting at 154. Jamal was knocking out like Cornelius K9 Bundridge and Julian J-Rock Williams. Jermell Charlo was fighting good fights with Gabriel Rosado, Vanis Martirosyan, John Jackson, and so forth. So they were both on their own paths at 154. Then Jamal Charlo went up to 160. And since he's gone up to 160, I've been a lot less pleased with his fight-by-fight opponent selection. He was killing it at 154, which is why I wanted to see either him or Jermall Charlo fight Canelo Alvarez. Like, both Charlos have beaten like Austin Trout, for instance. And Canelo is a 2-time champion at 154 because remember he was, beating like Josecito Lopez, Shane Mosley, Kermit Cintron, and then he had the fight with Floyd Mayweather, lost that, and then he had a couple more fights at 154 against Angulo, Lara, Kirkland, and then he flirted with 160 against a 160 belt holder but was never really a 160 fighter in Miguel Cotto. He was a 140, then 147, and kind of 154, but he wasn't even a true 154 guy, which is why when he went to 154, Austin Trout beat him by decision. Like Cotto fought at 154 and at 160, but he was never that big of a dude. So when Canelo first flirted with 160, it was against Cotto, and then he goes back to 154 to fight Amir Khan, also not a 154 guy by any stretch, and then he fought Liam Smith, taking Liam Smith's WBO light middleweight 154-pound title. So, and then he fought like Chavez Jr. Then he had the 2 fights with Gennady Golovkin at 160. So Canelo Alvarez, fought a lot of fights at 154, beat some really good fighters. Some of them were close and even controversial, like the one against Erislandy Lara and the one against Austin Trout for different reasons, but they were both competitive fights. But there was so much unfinished business, it felt, with the 2 Charlo brothers at 154 and Canelo not having fought either one of them, to where, several years have passed since. And the problem for Jamal Charlo is, since he went up to 160, he's been fighting like, Jorge Highland, Hugo Centeno Jr., Matt Korobov, which he had a lot of trouble against Korobov, Brandon Adams, Dennis Hogan, and then he fought a pretty good fighter in Sergey Derevianchenko, and then Juan Macias Montiel, which he won a unanimous decision, but it's not like when he made the fight against Montiel that anybody was like, oh, shoot, he's about to fight Montiel. Yeah, you can have a tough fight that ends up being way more than you bargained for against a no-name that nobody really cares about. That doesn't mean that when you schedule the fight that it was a risky fight. You know what I mean? We always see fight like Teofimo Lopez fighting George Kambosos. That wasn't seen as a very risky fight. George Kambosos happened to beat him, but going into the fight, you don't get credit taking on a fight that nobody wants to see you fight and then having trouble in that fight. Yes, you do get credited with gutting out a tough win, but in terms of your opponent's selection, it might turn out that the guy was better than you thought he was. But no, when you made that fight against Montiel, you weren't doing it because this was like the fight that the fans want to see. You know what I mean? So Jamal Charlo's opponent by opponent selection has not been good at 160. And that has really kind of, hit his legacy a bit where, all the promise and talent that he was showing at 154, yes, he's still looking very talented at 160. Yes, he is still undefeated. And yes, he hasn't even had a split decision win. All of his wins that weren't by KO or TKO have been unanimous decision wins. So it's not like Jamal Charlo's fights are super close, even though I thought that the one against Korobov was arguable. That one, I was unclear going into the scorecards who won that fight. But on paper, he has not even had a split decision win. So Jamal Charlo, with all that said, is still a very interesting stylistic matchup with Canelo Alvarez. And I do really hope that this is the fight that they make. If Canelo does, in fact, beat Jamal Charlo, then you should probably just clean up the business against Gennady Golovkin, make him come up to 168 like Jamal Charlo. If this fight is to be made, Jamal Charlo will undoubtedly be the one going up in weight. I don't think Canelo will ever return to weighing in at 160 at this point. So Jamal Charlo will have to basically fight his first fight at 168. But with that said, it's not like he's fighting a lifelong 168 guy. He's fighting Canelo, who's fought at 154 and even at 147. So even though Canelo has operated at higher divisions, weight classes than Jamal Charlo, Canelo is not a bigger guy than Jamal Charlo. Like if you saw them standing side by side, not just because of the height. Jamal Charlo is about 6 feet. Canelo Alvarez is about, again, 5'8", 5'9". So Jamal Charlo has like a 4-inch height advantage. They're about 3 to 4 inches. But Canelo is a thick dude. Like you see the way that he's built, his neck, his back, like he's a solid guy. He's built like a little shark. But size-wise, it's comparable. Like these guys deserve to be fighting each other. And it's appropriate that these guys are close enough sized where the fight still makes all the sense of the world. Even though, again, Canelo has had several fights at 168 now and that one fight at 175. They are about the same size. So I don't look at size as being a factor. Maybe some of Canelo's experience at the higher divisions, being able to absorb and get used to punches from bigger dudes and having to work through the early to middle rounds, still having the endurance to fight hard and dangerously late in the fight, which Canelo has a lot of late stoppages, doesn't he? But man, this is a compelling matchup. And again, a lot of us have been wanting to see this for a while. I still think that Canelo's going to have to, it's going to be interesting, in my opinion, to see who wins the jab battle between the two. Again, I think that the thing that Jamal Charlo is going to be running into is the same thing similar that Caleb Plant was running into. The fact that Canelo has just had so much more big fight against dangerous or at least very, very good opponents experience. No, I don't think Billy Joe Saunders, nor Callum Smith, nor Caleb Plant are necessarily as good as Jamal Charlo. But Triple G sure as hell is. And say what you want about who won those fights. I thought Triple G edged the first one. I thought the second one was a toss-up, my personal opinion. But Canelo did go 24 rounds with Triple G without hitting the canvas once. So something has to be said. Like, to me, that was a turning point in my perception of how good Canelo Alvarez is and can be when I saw him fight two very competitive fights with the longtime champion at 160, Triple G. Now, with Jamal Charlo, it's going to be a problem, I think, his legacy at 160 because, again, he is a longtime WBC champion. But just like Triple G never had before he fought Canelo Alvarez, and maybe, you could say that Daniel Jacobs was a very good opponent for Triple G at 160. Daniel Jacobs did knock out previously undefeated champion Kid Chocolate Peter Quillen. That was probably Daniel Jacobs' best win of his career. But Triple G had a rival opponent before that in the division. Yes, Triple G was supposed to fight Billy Joe Saunders for a time. He was supposed to fight Chris Eubank Jr. for a time. Those fights never materialized. But Triple G was also supposed to fight the very dangerous and undefeated Dmitry Pirog, former champion. Pirog was the guy who stopped Daniel Jacobs, first guy to beat Jacobs and the only guy for a long time to have beaten Daniel Jacobs before Daniel Jacobs lost to Triple G. But Dmitry Pirog ended up having some serious back issues that forced him to retire young and undefeated. That was supposed to be Triple G's main rival when they were both in their mid-20s, late 20s primes. Triple G versus Pirog. That fight never happened. So I feel like Triple G's legacy has suffered a bit, not only because of the arguably unfortunate scoring of that first fight between he and Canelo. The first fight in particular, again, the second one was a toss-up, but that first decision draw was kind of the turning point where Triple G's legacy would be so much different if that was ruled let's say, a split decision win for Triple G, Gennady Golovkin. But the same way that Triple G never had that rival fight against Pirog at 160, I feel like Jamal Charlo never having fought Jaime Munguia, never having fought Gennady Golovkin. And it wasn't for lack of trying. I don't think Golovkin wanted to fight Charlo, but Charlo didn't want to fight Demetrius Andrade. So you can't have it both ways. Charlo's refusal to fight longtime WBO champion, and they were champions at 154 at the same time too. Jamal Charlo were, champions at different times at 154 when Demetrius Andrade was a 154-pound champion, and also at 160 for Jamal Charlo. Jamal Charlo, longtime WBC champ at 160. Demetrius Andrade, longtime WBO champion at 160. So that fight never happening. It's unfortunate for Demetrius Andrade, but it's pretty whack, in my opinion, from the standpoint of Jamal Charlo not doing more to advocate and want that unification fight, battle of undefeateds. So I can't let Jamal Charlo off the hook for that one, because I'm convinced that Demetrius Andrade wants and has been wanting the fights against Jamal Charlo, against Triple G, Gennady Golovkin, hell, against Jaime Munguia. But nobody seems to want to fight Demetrius Andrade, and that just sucks from a competitive standpoint. This whole keep away from Demetrius Andrade business that's been going on. I don't think it's just not fair, in my opinion. But Jamal Charlo, now it looks like he might have an opportunity to fight Canelo Alvarez, which, whether you're talking Charlo, Billy Joe Saunders, Callum Smith, all of these guys look unfavorable to Canelo Alvarez, because while these guys are all waiting, basically trying to hold their ticket, their, hey, I'm undefeated ticket, fight me, Canelo, or hey, I'm holding a belt, fight me, Canelo. This whole thing that they've been doing at 160, at 168, whether you are now Triple G, I'm saying Triple G post those two fights with Canelo, whether you're, Andrade, even though he keeps on fighting whatever mandatory he has to fight, Jamal Charlo, Caleb Plant, Billy Joe Saunders, Callum Smith, at the time, Gilberto Ramirez, he was a former champ at 168. David Benavidez, same thing. Everybody is waiting around, hoping for the big Canelo fight. But the thing is, these guys have to fight each other, because the fact is, Canelo is actually going on this ass-kicking tour, fighting one of them at a time, one by one, knocking down champions, undefeated fighters, and basically just cleaning house. While, again, these guys aren't fighting each other. So, basically, you're lucky at this point if Canelo wants to fight you. So Jamal Charlo might be at the right place at the right time, still undefeated. So I hope that this fight between Alvarez and Charlo goes down, because stylistically, very important. Again, I'm very interested in the jab battle, first and foremost. I think that those early rounds are going to be really close. The question is, does Jamal Charlo get gun shy? Like we see Caleb Plant and these different fighters talking a big one going into the fight, but then they end up being a little cautious to really let their hands go and to really seize the fight. They're more so in please don't kill me mode. Like, did I do enough to edge out the round mode against Canelo Alvarez? We saw Billy Joe Saunders, I thought, fight pretty even rounds. I thought Billy Joe Saunders won a few of those rounds. I had a more pro Billy Joe scorecard than most of y'all, but I thought that he was competitive. But none of these guys are really trying to take Canelo out. James Kirkland did several years ago. It didn't end up working well for him. I don't mean go head over skis and basically forget about your defense in trying to take him out. I mean basically fight to your abilities and showcase all of your technical skills and your dangerous skills. We'll see if we see the best of Jamal Charlo against Canelo Alvarez. But yeah, those are some of my early thoughts here. I would have to lean. I'm going to do a full preview as we near the fight date, but my early thoughts I'm leaning Canelo Alvarez via very close decision win. We'll see how this materializes, but I hope this is a very exciting matchup if they make this one happen. But my early thoughts are close decision win for Canelo Alvarez. But I'm going to take a much closer look and do another analysis and do a full preview, and my thoughts on the fight might change as I rewatch a lot of these fighters' fights and further analyze this matchup. But yeah, let me know who you want to see Canelo fight next. Will you be happy if that opponent is Jamal Charlo? And who would you pick if these two were to get it on? Let me know in the comments. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you were into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.